the key thing here is to stay hungry, stay lean, and learn. Keep learning, because everything we know now, anything we've discussed on this call, is just a fraction of what is about to come our way.
Hello and welcome to another edition of the Accolite Podcast, where we feature industry leaders who share the unique experiences that shape their careers, the lessons they learned along the way, and their perspectives on the latest technology trends, leadership, and strategy. I'm your host, Mittu Sridhara, and I lead global marketing and strategy at Accolite. Today I have the pleasure of hosting a conversation with Mittu Sridhara. Mittu brings 30 years of strategic and operations experience and global knowledge of the technology sector. In his previous role as COO of Eurowag, he led the transformation of the company's digitization strategy and vision. Prior to that, Mittu held a senior executive role at Careem, Hepsiburada, TUI Group, Ladbrokes PLC, and Sabre Corporation. And so in this episode, we'll walk through Mittu's journey, how he's explored the experiences that have shaped his career and his approach to his leadership strategy. So absolute pleasure having you today, Mittu. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, Manoj.
So let's jump right in. So you've played obviously major executive roles. You've just made a switch recently, so maybe you could dive into that a bit. But what's your approach to driving transformation and change? Obviously, you went from major organization to organization. You built a big career on advisory boards. So how do you drive transformation and change with your leadership style in your past?
Very simply, I think it always boils down to a few fundamentals. One is clarity of the vision. Detailing, getting alignment across the organization on what that vision is. Typically, this tends to be around, is most powerfully told around the customer experience and how it could be delivered in a new and innovative way. But that then has to be also married up with kind of the value creation, both for the customer in terms of savings in time or savings in cost, and also for the value creation to the colleagues within the organization and for the other stakeholders in the organization itself. This also needs then to be complemented with a fairly detailed execution plan. You don't need to have all of the detail buttoned down at the start of that journey, but it has to be sufficiently detailed to where you understand how the different parts of the business need to execute and interrelate kind of their deliverables with key metrics, again, around that customer experience and the value creation. And this would then be communicated 5 times over so that everybody understands and buys in to what that is. And obviously, and hopefully they've all had an opportunity to kind of co-create that vision with you as part of their journey and co-create those roadmaps. And then critical to all of this is delivering quick wins on value, quick wins on the customer experience, and celebrating those quick wins so that all involved both enjoy the pleasures of those deliverables, of those deliveries to the customer. The customer starts to see and recognize the business or the brand as making their lives easier, solving their real needs. And of course, all this is a continuous cycle. So it's really those key things I would want to highlight as being key ingredients to how certainly I've driven change within organizations.
Isn't it interesting that, being part of, say, major transformations like yourself, I have been a part of a few as well, things that take 3, 6, 9, 12, over 2 years to do, how quickly we actually don't celebrate. We actually just move on to the next initiative and the next initiative. That time to celebrate is so important after some major wins along the way.
Absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And equally, I think that I didn't say is also almost celebrating the failures, because there are learning points, incredibly valuable learning points in what does not work from that original vision, and being able to both create a culture of learning from what did not work and being able to then correct for it is just as critical.
Right. Very interesting. So one of the roles that I think was interesting when I was looking back at your career, like you had some major success with Careem and Hepsiburada, and obviously there was an IPO that was integrated with Uber.
Mm-hmm.
Tell us about that. Like, that's fascinating. How are you a part of that? What did that entail? What were the challenges along the way that you faced?
So when you look at both Careem and Hepsiburada, they were, examples of models that to some degree had begun to take off in other geographies, but could be delivered in a different geographic context, a different customer base, in a different cultural setting. And both of those that were not tried and proven, but it could be taken, contextualized, and localized for their delivery with equal amounts of risk within those new geographies. So if you look at Careem, yes, Uber was out of the gates and had started to get up and running in its early days, but the founders at Careem were able to take that model, and we then as a team were able to quote unquote modify, adapt, and almost recreate it for the Middle East and Africa, where and then being close to the customer again becomes key. We were able to add features and functions such as cash that weren't as easily available on the Uber platform because they didn't need it in a US context, and that's what ultimately got Careem ahead of Uber in the Middle East and Africa, and in the 11 geographies that it operated within. Hence, that then led to the strategic sale to Uber, where we were beating Uber at their own game in those markets, and Dara at Uber decided then to not only invest but buy us out at Careem. So that's Careem, but again, very similarly with Hepsiburada, which, as you know, was IPO'd more recently last year. Very similar, it was a single trick electronics e-tailer that we were able to take, scale out, build out the marketplace, digitize all the customer experience end to end, drove metrics. We were doing things like ML-based AI and ML-based search as 8 years ago in that business, using data to ruthlessly drive efficiencies, connect up merchants to the platform, customers, and drive the best experience that was possible in those markets. So again, it comes back to having that common vision. In this instance, the underlying model being understood by the teams, changing the customer experience, making it more frictionless in those markets, and ultimately delivering. And I think the other component I would add here is some degree of resilience, because you can think something's got to begin to make money sooner than it can, and some things start to make money sooner than you thought they would. But being resilient through that process, understanding your vision, believing your model, and sticking with it, also quite key.
So there are obviously several challenges that you faced, like not only with Careem and Hepsiburada, you've had challenges throughout your career. Like what if you look back, what are some of the biggest challenges you faced, and how did you overcome them? Obviously, multiple sectors you played in, including in IPOs and technology, in ML, and now you're working in generative AI as well. Like, maybe you could just tell a story or two about one of the challenges you faced and how you overcame it.
Often the biggest challenge within all of these, since we're in a technology and change context, is change management. Is taking both your own teams and the entire company on that journey of changing the customer experience and the value creation. So technology is only going to get easier, as we just discussed before this call. And however, technology has never really been the key issue in the build. Where it gets difficult is on the change management side, either changing customer behavior if you need to, and that's often actually the easier bit, because if you're delivering something that is easier to adopt, less frictionless, causing less friction, so to say, the customer adoption naturally comes. The colleague adoption often takes time in terms of changing business process, the scale of that growth, the ask of the colleagues in terms of sometimes the amount of work that needs to be done in certain periods to get at these tough challenges that come along the way is often where the rub is. And so that ability, as we said earlier in this call, to keep the vision, keep communicating around it, ensuring alignment, teamwork being critical, often key, in my opinion.
One of the things that I always focused on and was a challenge was like you mentioned the integration with colleagues, right? Because not only do you need to have them buy into sometimes your vision, you have to elevate them to say, you know what, they were also part of the story at the same time, driving to your success. And I think creating allies as you transform is so critical. Otherwise, you could quickly fizzle out in a transformation or any type of strategy really quickly without that call it multi-team alignment around you.
Very much so. I think the key here is it's got to be quote unquote every colleague's vision, not your vision or the leadership team's vision. It's got to be the vision of everybody within the company.
Exactly.
On what the overall vision is. They've got to have participated in co-creating that vision, as we said earlier on this call. But more importantly, they've got to own their bits, and again within that, be able to shift their view of what that bit is as their understanding evolves. And that's the framework we as leaders need to create, is this framework of vision, of drive, of relentless focus and commitment, but at the same time, an environment where It's psychologically safe for colleagues to discuss diverse opinions, but also be able to push something where it may not have worked, and know that they are safe in that environment to either disagree, agree, and or to have failed and learn from it.
Yeah, totally. How important is psychological safety in an
Hugely,
environment, right?
hugely
To go
important.
to that point. Yeah. One of the things that one of my colleagues, when I was thinking I was at an airline, she mentioned like the concept of creating insiders, where you're like, you know what, come behind the curtain, let's share, and it's okay to be transparent. And once you create that, the chemistry just amplifies so hard because you've created that psychological safety. You've given the undercovers view of the vision, and now ultimately is to get that buy-in to deliver together.
Exactly. And early in my career, I had the pleasure of working with your founder, Leela, and
Yes.
we were part of a team where we co-created with the customer. The customer was in the room with us, building software, adopting business process. This is now we're talking about 25 odd years ago, but building process and getting that customer vision, co-creating with the customer, with your own teams. Like I said, creating psychological safety for all is so critical.
Agreed. And then to the same kind of like concept of decision making as well as like getting buy-in, you've done this now across multiple geographies, and you have
Mhm.
probably have a vast amount of cultural context across these geographies at the time. So, have you had to adapt your strategy as you're working in, say, one region versus another, and how does that work in terms of inspiring teams and diverse cultures?
So very simply, the basics again, the basic principles of what we discussed, stay the same. Common vision, that ability potentially to have to explain that vision a bit more in detail, and to co-create or recreate some of that vision and how it could be solutioned locally, in that environment, in that market. What you often find, obviously, is each market is different. The level of skill is different. So in some markets and with some teams, you may have to increase the level of mentoring you provide, and most importantly, I think the key element in all of this, which applies, is empathy. One, and then the other is again valuing diversity, because everybody has something to say that is really valuable to the evolution of the organization, of the experience, of the colleague experience, and the customer experience, and the colleague experience within that. So empathy, and most importantly, ultimately, when you're in an environment that's new, people need to know that you're walking the talk, that you really believe, and that you're living by what you're asking others to do just as much.
It's interesting sometimes if you don't have the like vast cultural context you do, that you worked in kind of multiple regions, multiple environments, that a normal person actually may say take a, I don't know, American or Canadian or whatever based approach and try to apply that to Europe or APAC and expect similar results, and not. And I think what hopefully that what seems like what you've gained is this empathy towards a variety of different environments along the way.
And it's an empathy, but it's also an appreciation that actually
Appreciation.
you learn as you go as well on how people think and how they think differently, and how valuable that is, and kind of how you evolve, you grow, but also how you could and what you can bring to a team. So again, as you know, Manoj, over the years, from my own direct leadership teams, I have two CEOs, I think, and about 14 CTOs and two CMOs in industry now. And that's just the leaders, but there are hopefully hundreds, if not more, of colleagues that have all been part of these journeys, hundreds, thousands have been part of these journeys. And all of us have benefited from working with each other, learning from each other, learning across, learning languages, cultures, customs, but also more importantly, participating in joint success and having fun.
I think the ultimate word here is perspective is so important, and with different environments, cultures, backgrounds, perspective may be even more important than experience itself sometimes.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah.
Couldn't agree more.
So let's shift gears into some innovation and maybe things that you're passionate about. Like you've had a career that has heavy kind of has heavily dived into ML, AI, data. So what are you seeing now with Gen AI? You and I were chatting just before the call. Obviously, this is an area that you're focused in. How is Gen AI changing the game? Where are we at in terms of like the maturity level, and how do you think it's going to start to seep into things such as operational efficiency and customer experiences?
So I sit here, as I said earlier, before we began this conversation, I sit here super excited because I think things are fundamentally changing and are also quite fundamentally different this time. in that, if you could reimagine the mobile phone moment of 2008, but that is then being enhanced by the fact that cloud is also available. And all of that can be brought together in a conversational interface. So no apps, no siloed pieces of software to solve elements of your need or of your business need, but being able to have a dialogue with the phone for as a matter of speaking on this call, that then is able to go out and mine all of the rich data around you as a person, be it your habits, your health, your contact list, your emails, and or if it was in an organizational context, go across all of the data in the enterprise, including stuff that is unstructured, and be able to pull an answer back to you within seconds. That's what we're talking about. That is what is fundamentally different. So, and the interface can be a conversational interface, which is also things like user adoption, that degree of customer experience we've talked about starts to go away. So this time around, I think it's fundamentally different, both in the speed and the scale of what's coming out. But it's early days. These are very, very early days where we all need to learn to experiment, understand better what the capability is of Gen AI/AI, and then as a result, data and software in its new definition, and be able to effectively reimagine how business can be done, reimagine how we could live our lives better and more effectively.
It seems like the world, like the interface will be conversational voice, so there's no potentially even physical need for touch and things like that as much. And then it's as good as the data set is behind it to give it that relevance and context, right? I think it feels like sometimes organizations are going to that next step without understanding that if fundamentally, if your data is no good, then the interface will not that be great for the experience as well for customers.
True. I think this is where organizations need to experiment to understand fundamentally what is different. The models are relevant. Models are still yet to be built, and will start to come out that will be commercially off the shelf, available to your domains. Now there could be three or four. The question is, how do you experiment? But more importantly, how do you prepare? To your point, Manoj, how do you prepare the data you have, both structured and unstructured, to be ready to be consumed by these models, to have the guardrails in place to ensure that they operate safely when they do go out to chat GPT, 4 or 5.0, that they do so in a manner that is safe, but also does not expose your data to the world, but also as it ingests data, is not bringing either pieces of software in or other pieces of information that could become malware in your own software stack or solution stack.
Right. So
Yeah, and we can talk about guardrails, etc. But yeah, hopefully that
yeah,
begins
absolutely,
to answer
I agree.
what you've talked about.
Yeah, that makes good sense. I think the guardrails and ethics around what we do is as critical as obviously the capability itself. I was going to ask you, you've had a long career in e-commerce and product as well. So how do you think?
Did you just call me old, Manoj?
Did I say long career? I meant vast, deep career. Obviously, not old, not old.
Anyways, go on. Yeah.
What do you think this generative AI world and will impact e-commerce as you think about it going forward? Obviously, very different from what you've had in your past. How do you think that accelerates that perspective?
It accelerates multiple dimensions. Think about, as we just began to speaking just a little earlier. Think about search, right? Now suddenly search becomes nobody typing into a user, hyper personalization around search, but also the interaction with the customer is, as it's beginning to commonly be recognized, is going to be voice led, and it can search across a vast array of both past behavior of the customer, also intent, and think about the stuff that used to be really hard to do, the product catalog with its descriptors, competitive comparison, price. Name all those difficult problems that we spent, companies, billion-dollar companies were established just building product catalogs. All of that becomes, exponentially easier to string together to deliver an experience. So being able to stand up a business, recreate businesses, collapse boundaries around product catalog descriptors, time to onboard a product, all of it starts to change. So in an e-commerce context, I think, well, in a business context and an e-commerce context, hugely powerful. And the fact that software itself can be written 300, 400 times quicker in terms of percentage of productivity from and the average software developer, data can be strung together a lot quicker. You start to think of most businesses that are even physical businesses that potentially had a challenge investing to digitize themselves. Now they can, and quite quickly.
Amazing at the speed at which it's going. And I think to my last question here, as the world is changing rapidly, you have this kind of new series of technology worker that's entering the market, and they need to be inspired. If you were to leave them with a few words, how do you get these new entrants and new leaders in technology? What would you leave them with in terms of a couple words of inspiration as they get ready for their world into technology, their world into leadership? Maybe you could give them some insights.
Sure, I think I think the exciting thing is these technology leaders who truly understand technology you're extremely well placed. First of all, for what is beginning to happen in the world. For the first time, it's no longer going to be an excuse of the technology took too long, was too expensive, or too complex. You can make that a lot simpler. And you, as leaders, are also in a place where you can join up technology with the process you're trying to automate. So the key thing here is to really get under what is the pain point you're trying to solve in the customer experience or in the business or in that business need. Ruthlessly simplify that process, because now you can. You're no longer constrained by what you could not do. Anything is possible. And then being able, like we said, to be able to describe that vision, which is probably where some work needs to be done for some of the technologies, describe that vision in simple language. But you can build your prototypes a lot quicker to describe and describe that experience. So you are beautifully placed in what's about to happen. The key thing here is to stay hungry, stay lean, and learn. Keep learning, because everything we know now, anything we've discussed on this call, is just a fraction of what is about to come our way. So staying hungry, continuously learning, but staying focused on what is that problem you're trying to solve. Absolutely key.
That's really great. I heard curiosity, simplicity. I also heard keep experimenting. Obviously, stay hungry is what you mentioned as well. Thank you
Mm-hmm.
so much, Mittu. Your insights into the world of executive leadership, technology, and Gen AI have been truly enlightening. Your leadership journey is an inspiration to me. To all of our listeners, thank you for joining us today. We hope you found this conversation as engaging as I did. Stay tuned for more insightful discussions in our upcoming episodes. Until next time, this is your host, Manoj Jazra for the Accolite Podcast, signing off.